You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of What If Deku Enters Monster Museum. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Jevm.mita on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Running up the hill to the UA campus, izukumidoriya, latest holder of the quirk One for All, jogged through the gates of UA. I made it in time, Izuku breathed. 10 months ago, before All Might had taken him under his wing and trained him with the pass the test, American dream plan, running up that hill would have made a 14-year-old Izuku breathless and gasping. Now, after all of the sweat and tears that Izuku had put into his training, it barely left fatigued at all. After going above and beyond with clearing Takoba Municipal Beach of all of the trash that people had illegally dumped there, All Might had finally found Izuku worthy of inheriting his quirk. Looking back on the event that had occurred only hours earlier, Izuku felt overwhelming excitement over his lifelong dream of having a quirk fulfilled, even if the method was unique. I ate that hair, but did it really do anything? Izuku thought to himself as he followed the crowd of students all hoping to pass the entrance exam. There wasn't any time to test out the quirk that All Might had given me, so I'm not sure how it will work. Will I gain a muscle form like he does? Will it be strong to notice? So many options. Move aside, Deku. A familiar angry voice caused Izuku's head to spin around. Walking behind him with a signature scowl on his face was Katsuki Bakugo, his breath misting in the cold winter air. Like Izuku, Katsuki had also turned 15, and with it had gained a few extra centimeters of height. Kaken! Izuku exclaimed, flinching backwards instinctively. Get out of my way or you're dead, Katsuki growled, stalking forward. And morning. Let's do our best. Izuku began to say, before trailing off as Katsuki simply walked past him, not even sparing Izuku a second glance or a dirty look. Ever since that day with the sludge villain, Kaken stopped tormenting me, Izuku thought, puzzled by his former friend's behavior. Even when I did much better in the sports festival at Aldera Junior High, Kaken didn't mock me, I think. TCH, stupid Deku, did you enjoy being helpless for so long, huh? If it was anyone else, I'm pretty sure they'd mean it as a compliment, but from him? Taking in a deep breath of crisp air, Izuku straightened his shoulders and pulled on his bag's shoulder straps. I gotta stop flinching instinctively. Yeah, it's not like before. Just remember the past 10 months and move forward. He took a step. My first steps towards becoming a hero. And promptly tripped on his own foot, causing him to fall face first towards the ground. He would have landed flat on his face, only for a pulling sensation on his clothes to pull him back, causing him to spin around and land onto a pair of soft pillows. Oh thank goodness, Izuku thought, at least someone managed to put some pillows on the ground. I'll look like an idiot, but at least I'm an idiot who is conscious. Except, something was off. Izuku could still feel that he was standing upright, an arm was holding him close across his back, and the pillows were talking. Whoa, careful there broccoli top, don't want you making out with the asphalt before the test even begins. Kaorinis, let him up this instant. Your behavior is simply unbecoming. Now there was a second voice. It was probably the second pillow speaking. Thank you very much, pillows, for breaking my fall, Izuku said, his voice muffled from his face being pressed into the warm surface of the large pillows. What do you, oh, right, 1 second, the first voice said, and Izuku's eyes saw light as his head was pulled back. Looking upwards, Izuku met the gaze of a six-eyed woman with long, lavender hair, each of her eyes a solid ruby red in color. She was giving him a mischievous smirk, and looking down, Izuku realized that the pillows that had saved him were, in fact, her large chst. He involuntarily grunted, his head lolling back as his usually hyperactive mind suddenly experienced a blue screen, all perception now muted behind white noise. "Oh, well done, Kaorinis," the second voice scolded, "now you've gone and made the poor boy faint." "Oh, lay off, Sarah, he's fine. It's almost as if he's never seen a pair of bub before," Kaorini scoffed, gently shaking Izuku's limp, unresponsive form. "I swear," the second voice muttered, pulling Izuku away from Kaorini's, giving Izuku a light slap on the cheek. "Are you alright?" Izuku snapped out of his daze, his sight focusing on a new girl. She had sky-blue eyes and blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail, with ears that stuck out to the side of her head covered in short, blonde hair. "Cavalry?" Izuku murmured, wondering why the pro-hero who had inspired him 10 months ago was at UA. "No, but I am flattered by the comparison," the centaur said, smiling warmly at Izuku. "Are you able to stand?" Izuku dumbly nodded, only wobbling slightly when the blonde-haired girl stepped back. Focusing his gaze, Izuku realized that the two girls before him were heteromorphs. The blonde was a centaur, just like Cavalry, and even seemed to share some similarities to the pro-hero in their facial features. The second girl, the one who had broken his fall, had a human torso on top of a spider's cephalothorax. Both girls wore a white uniform, consisting of a white blazer and dress shirt with a black tie with white stripes. Their uniform differed when it came to their skirts. The centaur girl had a skirt that went along the length of her equine lower half, reaching midway to her knees, whereas the arachne girl had a more typical skirt, reaching to the middle of her pedipalps that resembled legs. She also wore a longer sleeved shirt, with white gloves covering both of her hands. "I am very sorry for Kaorini's actions," the centaur girl said, bowing in apologies to Izuku before elbowing her companion in the ribs. "Good luck on the entrance exam." The two girls walked past Izuku, Kaorini's audibly complaining to her friend about the strength of her elbow strike. Are you okay?" Izuku turned to the new voice, seeing a brown-haired girl standing there, her hand stretched palm out towards him. "I saw you trip and was going to use my quirk to stop your fall, but I guess that girl with the purple hair was faster." Yeah, I'm alright," Izuku blankly nodded, his mind still recoiling from what he had just seen. "Man, this sure is super nerve-wracking," the brunette chuckled, turning towards the auditorium they had been directed to. "Well, good luck to both of us. See ya." Izuku simply watched her walk off, before his eyes snapped wide as everything that had happened was finally processed in his mind. "I talked to 3 girls," he internally cheered. "This really is the best day." Fortunately for Izuku's joy, he remained blissfully unaware of the various looks, stares, and the occasional jealous glare that was sent his way by other students. As Tenya-ida sat in the auditorium, awaiting the start of the presentation UA would give regarding the entrance exam, he silently swept his gaze across the large room, taking in all of the sounds of students chattering amongst themselves. While I certainly would prefer if everyone would quiet down and take their seats before the presentation begins, I can somewhat understand if it is simply students trying to calm their nerves before the exam. Only 0.3% of students, 1 in 300, will pass this test. With there being 40 spaces available for the hero course, and 4 of them taken up by those in the recommendation course, I must do better and stand out amongst a crowd of 300 fellow students. Truly UA is the best hero academy in Japan. Tenya pushed his rectangular glasses up his nose, once again checking his watch that he wore on his wrist. The presentation was scheduled to start soon, and yet there was no sign of them. "Sarah, Kaorinis, where are you?" Tenya muttered to himself, only for his attention to be caught by someone speaking from the aisles. "Excuse me, pardon us, coming through." Turning his head to the right, Tenya saw his childhood friend and rival, Sarah Kurusu, as well as her half-sister, Kaorini's kurusu, squeezing their way past the other applicants, both trying to get to their seats. Due to spaces being made to accommodate heteromorphs with larger bodies, Sarah and Kaorini's didn't have any extra trouble, a fact that Tenya mentally applauded UA for taking into consideration. This truly is the best hero school in Japan, he reiterated to himself, before greeting his classmates. Sarah, Kaorini's, the presentation is about to start. What is the reason for your tardiness? Hello to you too, glasses, Kaorini scoffed, taking her assigned seat one down from Tenya's right while Sarah took the seat next to him, sitting in between the two. Now, Sarah mediated, a role she often took whenever Tenya and Kaorini's were in the same room. We're sorry for being late, Tenya, but we had a bit of an encounter at the front entrance. Don't tell me that you two were picked on again due to your heteromorphic nature, Tenya sighed, rubbing his eyes in exasperation. The number of close-minded, discriminatory racists that still exist within this nation is simply astounding. Astoundingly terrible. Give me a description of their features and I'll be sure to report them to the school faculty. Nah, nothing like that, Kaorini's dismissed, waving a hand in front of her face. Some kid tripped over his own feet. If it wasn't for my intervention he'd have gotten all close and personal with the concrete. Tenya pondered, looking down at his lap in thought. Should a student who has such little coordination truly be attempting this exam? Probably not, Kaorini's admitted. UA is ruthless with their admittance into the hero course, only the best are accepted, the rest are swept away like chaff. While I don't condone your language or comparisons, sister, Sarah admonished, it is the harsh truth that many here today will go home with shattered dreams. For just the three of us representing semi-private academy to be accepted, 897 applicants must be rejected. For the 36 who passed the entrance exam, over 10,500 must fail. Truly they are astounding odds. The trio's attention was drawn to the stage at the front of the auditorium as a spotlight snapped on, shining down and illuminating a figure standing on the stage. He wore dark sunglasses, a LTHR jacket, pants and gloves, and wore what could only be described as a stereo over his neck. His blonde hair was spiked into a point high above his head, and a small blonde mustache grew on his upper lip. Tenya immediately recognized him as Present Mike, a pro hero and teacher at UA High School. Welcome to today's live performance. Present Mike greeted in a loud voice, his quirk, ironically registered as voice, amplifying the sound, preventing the pro from needing a microphone or sound system. Everybody say, hey. Silence rang out throughout the auditorium. Tenya was simply taken aback by the pro's entrance, and glancing to his right, both of the Kurusu sisters were just as surprised, with Sarah having flinched back in response to the loud noise that her sensitive hearing was assaulted with. Judging by the lack of a reaction from the rest of the gathered attendees, they were all equally as shocked. Well, that's cool, my examinee listeners. Present Mike said, unbothered by the lack of response to his prompt. I'm here to present the guidelines of your practical. Are you ready? Yeah. Once again, none of the students responded, though Tenya noticed Sarah's ears flicking in agitation. Sarah, Tenya whispered, trying to keep his voice as low as possible. A normal human wouldn't be able to hear him, he could barely hear his own voice, but he knew that Sarah's enhanced hearing would be able to detect it. Is something wrong? It's nothing, Tenya, she whispered. Someone is muttering to themselves, that's all. Something about Present Mike being a radio host. This is how the test will go, my listeners. Present Mike continued, cutting Tenya off from the next question he was going to ask his friend. You'll be experiencing 10-minute-long mock city maneuvers. Bring along anything you want. After this presentation, you'll each head to your assigned testing location. Okay. The three semi-students each looked at their forms, noticing that each of them had been placed in a separate testing area. Not only that, but the form also listed 4 kinds of villains that the participants would be facing off against. However, Tenya noticed that the entire time, Sarah's ears continued to flick, her face as well becoming taut as she tried to suppress a grimace. Which imbecile is doing that? Tenya thought. Don't they realize how disrupting they are for those with quirks that enhance hearing? Nudging Sarah, he gave her a questioning look when she turned her head to face him. Immediately understanding what he was trying to silently communicate, she nodded her head up the auditorium, indicating where the noise was coming from. Focusing his hearing, Tenya tried to hear what his friend had heard, and sure enough he began to hear faint mutterings coming from above and behind him. Discreetly looking behind him, Tenya found the source of the noise, a greenet with a messy hairstyle dressed in a black middle school uniform. Before he could make a comment, Present Mike continued his presentation. Each site is filled with 3 kinds of villains, he explained, bringing up a rudimentary image of a city block on the screen. Surrounding it were the silhouette of 3 machines, one labeled 1P, another 2P, and a third 3P. Points are awarded for defeating each according to their respective difficulty levels. Use your quirks to disable these faux villains and earn points. That's your goal, listeners. Of course, Present Mike clarified, playing the anti-hero and attacking other examinees is prohibited. Noticing a discrepancy in the forms they were given, seeing a gap in Present Mike's speech, and growing increasingly frustrated with the offender's constant noise, Tenya stood up from his seat, much to the surprise of Sarah and Kaorini's. May I ask a question? Tenya called out, projecting his voice down the rows of seats. There appear to be no fewer than 4 varieties of faux villain on this handout, he explained, pointing at the silhouettes that were displayed on the handout. Such a blatant error, if it is one, is highly unbecoming for UA, Japan's top academy. We're all in here today in the hopes of being molded into model heroes. And you, with the curly hair, he started, swngng his free arm around and pointing at the muttering boy. But before he could begin, he felt someone grab his hand that held the sheet that was now resting by his side. Looking down, he saw Sarah giving him a look, one he understood all too well from a lifetime of being side by side to his rival and closest friend. Sighing quietly, Tenya looked back at the student, who had pointed a finger at himself as if to confirm who Tenya was speaking to. Yes, you, he confirmed, though this time speaking in a not-so-harsh tone. You've been muttering this whole time. While I can understand the stress that anyone in the room must be facing with this exam, bear in mind that there are those here who have quirks that enhance their sense of hearing. If you must mutter, do so in a manner that is inaudible. All right, Present Mike said, focusing everyone's attention away from the now silent greenet and back towards the stage. Examinee 7111, nice catch. Thanks. The pro-hero gestured to the screen behind him where a 4th and final silhouette of a villain appeared. The 4th faux villain variety gets you 0 points. They're more of an obstacle than anything. There's only one at each site, a gimmick that'll rampage around in close quarters. Avoid them whenever possible, they're programmed to make your time all the more difficult. Thank you, sir, Tenya bowed, I apologize for the interruption. Taking his seat, Tenya felt a pressure on his forearm. Looking to his right, he saw Sarah give him a smile and a small nod, clearly appreciating him toning down his response to the student. Thank you, she mouthed. Tenya simply gave her a small smile as Present Mike concluded. That's all from me. I'll leave my listeners with our school motto. The French Emperor and General Napoleon Bonaparte once said, true heroism consists in being superior to the ills of life. Plus ultra. Break a leg, everyone. If someone had to choose a word to describe how Izuku felt at this exact moment, nervous wouldn't even be coming close to it. After Present Mike had finished his presentation, and how cool was it for Izuku to see Present Mike in person, all of the students had been led to changing booths to change into clothing more suited for a combat situation, rather than fighting in their uniforms. Following that, they had been sorted into groups of who was assigned to what testing ground and herded onto buses that would drive them to their testing site. The fact that UA required buses to travel from the main campus to the hero sites was simply astonishing to Izuku. He now truly understood why so many people these days were calling for the UA campus to be registered as its own prefecture, simply based on the amount of land the high school took up. Izuku stood before the walls of the fake city area, trembling with nerves, excitement and fear in equal parts. It was an intimidating sight, with the many replica office buildings standing above the 10-meter-high walls. Emblazoned on the wall of the testing site was the Greek letter beta. The fact that there were 23 other training grounds this size was almost too much for Izuku to comprehend. Looking around, he took in the sight of the other 449 applicants who were assigned to the same testing grounds. Why is everyone so confident? Aren't they nervous? Izuku yelled in his mind, not understanding why he alone seemed to be rife with nerves. Ah, they've even got equipment to match their quirks. As Izuku continued to look over the crowd of students, hoping that he'd see someone who looked as nervous as he did, his eyes caught the sight of a girl with short, brown hair. It's her, the girl from the school entrance. We're at the same test site, he thought to himself, watching as she performed some sort of breathing and clapping exercise. I've gotta thank her for earlier. Even if she wasn't the one to save me, she did try to. Yeah, I'll wish her luck as well. But as Izuku stiffly walked over to her, doing his best to maintain the courage to initiate a conversation with a girl, he was stopped by a hand on his shoulder. That girl seems to be doing some kind of meditation. Izuku jerkily turned his head around, coming face to face with the student who had scolded him in the auditorium. He had dark blue hair that was parted on the side of his head, and wore rectangular glasses over his eyes. The arm that he held Izuku's shoulder with was muscular and defined, much more so than the amount of muscle mass that Izuku had managed to gain in the 10 months of training All Might had put him through. He wore a blue shirt and matching pants, both with black lines bordered in white. But most frightening of all was the stern, near angry expression he had on his face. Eep, him too. Izuku flinched, accidentally speaking aloud. Why are you here? The tall student asked, keeping his grip on Izuku's shoulder, preventing him from fleeing. Hoping to interfere and distract her like you did in the auditorium? No, I swear. Izuku said in a panicky voice, fear of the student causing his voice to raise an octave. The brunette seemed to want to say more before he paused, his eyes narrowing before he let out a sigh, taking his hand off Izuku's shoulder. You're clearly afraid of me, and I can understand why after what I said, he explained, crossing his arms over his chest, his expression still stern, but now no longer angry. But know that I said what I did not simply because your incessant mumbling was irritating me, though that was a part of it. Izuku flinched once more, reminded of his habit. The reason why I called you out was because of my classmate. She has enhanced hearing, meaning that your mumbling was distracting her through the entirety of present mix presentation. As one of her closest friends and rivals, I simply couldn't let your distracting behavior slide. She has put in too much time and effort into her training and preparation for this day simply to fail because someone couldn't stop their mumbling. Izuku pulled his shoulders in, doing his best to ignore and tune out the snickers and remarks being made about him from the students that were nearby. And begin. All of the students, Izuku included, simply didn't understand what had been said. The voice of present Mike came from a tower that was attached to the outside of the wall surrounding the test site. Izuku and the others simply stared blankly at the pro hero as he leaned over the edge of the tower, his quirk amplifying his voice. Go, he yelled down to them, SWNGNG his arms. Real battles don't have a countdown. The die has been cast, time's a wasting. Huh? Izuku asked, confused by what the pro had meant, but as he turned around and saw the other applicants rushing off into the cityscape, it all clicked in his mind. I'm already behind. Izuku realized, making a mad dash after the other students to try and keep up. Calm down. It's fine. I'm fine. I can do this. I'm meant to do this. Meant to be a hero. After all, Izuku reasoned to himself, rounding a corner as the other students ahead of him split up, each searching for their own prey. All Might is backing me up. Dashing round the corner of a street, Izuku had barely a moment to think before the wall of a building next to him exploded outwards. Crashing out of the rubble, Izuku gasped as a one-pointer villain bot fixed its cyclopsean gaze on him. It had a boxy head, with a single, glowing red eye centered in the front of its head. Its arms were covered in a shield, each with the number 1 painted white, denoting its value and threat level. Underneath its head and body was the housing for the wheels that caused it to zip around the testing field. It was made out of metal and painted green, and Izuku was its newest target. "Target locked," it said in a synthetic voice, turning towards Izuku and accelerating. "Prepare for termination. Here it comes." Izuku said, his attention zeroing in onto the machine racing towards him. One pointer. Quick, but fragile. I can do this. Time seemed to slow as adrenaline pumped through Izuku's brain. Exposed wires and joints. Any competent villain would cover those up, but the school wants students to beat these machines. And this is the easiest of the lot. Just got to analyze its movements and react. Use my analysis skill, just like cavalry told me to. I can do this. The machine raced towards him, getting ever closer. As it neared, the one-pointer raised an arm, not even bothering to hide its telegraphed actions. Now! Izuku yelled to himself. He threw himself to the side, causing the villain bot's shield-like arm to slam into the concrete where Izuku had once stood. While still in midair, Izuku decided to take a chance, grabbing one of the exposed wires that ran along the outside of the machine's arm, pulling strong. The wire easily gave out, causing the machine to stutter and halt. Before Izuku could celebrate, however, a blue, dazzling laser burst through the machine's CHST, turning into scrap metal. A laser? Izuku thought, turning his head towards the direction the beam had come from. Standing further down the street stood a student, his blonde hair spiking to the side of his head. He wore black pants, and on his CHST was a white tracksuit with a frilled collar and zipper. On his waist he wore a belt with a gem-like surface in the middle that glowed a pale blue, with a mist-like substance leaking from it into the air, dissipating as it got further away. "Merci," he called out to Izuku as he ran past the stunned Greenet, his Japanese carrying a noticeable French accent. "I appreciate the assist. We make a wonderful team, but I doubt we'll meet again." He gave Izuku a wink as he passed, sprinting down the street and rounding a corner, disappearing from sight. "Adieu. Won't meet again?" Izuku asked no one, wondering what the French student had meant. 6 minutes, 2 seconds remaining. Present mix voice alerted, the noise reaching all over the testing site. "Oh no," Izuku cried, realizing how little time he had left. Glancing around, he saw the ongoing battles that students were having with the villain bots. Across the plaza he had found himself at, the ruined, damaged remains of various one-pointer, two-pointer and three-pointer robots lay scattered about. Movement to his right caught Izuku's attention. He looked over, seeing the brown-haired girl from the entrance placing her fingers on some disabled, but still active, villain bots. Despite what the laws of reality would claim, these machines started to float into the air, some of the more active ones flailing about, trying to find some sort of surface to grip to. They never had the chance, because the girl placed all 10 of her fingers together, causing the weightlessness of the machines to end, gravity causing them to smash into the pavement. 28 points, she sighed with exhaustion. 45 points, another voice said, accompanied by a crash. Izuku turned to see the blue-haired boy from before crashing feet first into a two-pointer villain bot, smoke and explosions bursting from the machine. "CRP, this is really bad," Izuku said, his eyes darting about, trying to find anything that could help him pass. "I only have 1 point, I need more to pass." As he frantically searched over the area, Izuku spotted his solution. Lying on the ground was the shield-like arm of a one-pointer, with some of the wires that connected it to the body still attached. Next to it was a shard of metal, the broken remains of a two-pointer's tail. Only part of it remained, one of the flat sides of the machine's tail, and a rod of metal stuck out, still attached to the scrap metal. "That's it, this is my chance," Izuku cheered, picking both pieces of scrap metal. Izuku lifted the piece of the two-pointer in his right hand, and wrapped the wires attached to the piece of the one-pointer around his left, both pieces acting as a rudimentary sword and shield. "This is how I'll do it," Izuku decided, rushing off to find another villain bot to fight. "I'll win with a tribute to the two heroes who helped me on my journey, the weapons of cavalry, and the muscles All Might helped train into me." His running was cut short as the ground beneath him began to tremble. Stray pieces of rubble and concrete started to clatter on the ground, becoming more and more erratic, until the entire city seemed to be shaking. Izuku, the blue-haired boy, the brown-haired girl, and every other student within testing grounds Beta stared in shock at the sight they beheld. Emerging from within a building was an enormous villain bot, completely dwarfing every other type of machine that had come before it. It had a flat, elongated rectangular head, with 8 glowing red eyes placed on its face. Each of its mechanical fingers were bigger than a person, and as it loomed over the students frozen in fear, it raised to its full height, giving off a reverberating noise, declaring its presence to the mortals at its feet. It was this noise that snapped the students out of their stupor, causing all of them to flee in terror. That's the zero-pointer. Izuku trembled, his makeshift sword falling out of his limp right hand, hitting the ground with a clatter. His shield remained in his grip, but only because of the wires that he had tied around his hand and wrist. "That's way too big." The zero-pointer rumbled forwards, its large size catching the corner of a building, causing the concrete to crack and fall, tumbling onto the street below. "It's not a gimmick," Izuku murmured, stunned by the size, slowly backing up as his mind realized the fear that was coursing through his veins. "It's completely overwhelming." "Hiya!" Sarah let out a battle cry, slamming her makeshift weapons into the metallic body of another villain bot, this time a three-pointer. Taking a second to catch her breath, she swept her gaze around the forest, not finding any enemies within sight. Deciding to go a step further, she focused her hearing, and while the sounds of her fellow students doing battle were a constant noise, she didn't hear the telltale signs of branches being snapped, grass trampled, and the hum of an engine. For the moment, she was alone. Taking a once-over look at the weapons she held on her arms, Sarah winced at the damage they had taken. Made out of the shield arms of a one-pointer, Sarah had ripped them off of the first one she had encountered in the woods of Testing Grounds Omega, where she and over 400 of her fellow students had been placed. While they had served her well, there was only so much damage they could take before becoming useless. "Oh well," Sarah muttered to herself, "might as well get rid of these." Using her incredible strength granted to her as a centaur, Sarah pried apart the metal she had bent around her forearms to keep her weapons in place, tossing them aside onto the ground, holding her arms over her head as she stretched out her tired limbs. While as a centaur she was gifted with enhanced stamina, her makeshift weapons were anything but light. "I'm more annoyed that those Gatling guns were simply for show," she huffed, looking critically at the multi-barreled replicas attached to the underside of the one-pointer shields. While Sarah was more proficient with melee weapons, her mother had insisted that she have a baseline ability to wield any weapon, also she would never be without options. "Mother wasn't exaggerating about UA tests," Sarah said, taking a short mouthful from her water bottle. Placing it back in its holster that she wore on her waist, movement from above her caught her eye. Flying through the air was a bird, a common sight within the forested testing grounds. What was strange was that the bird, as well as many others, were all flying to and from the same location. Sarah glanced back at the smoking, sparking wreck of the villain bot, considering her options. "This is a test, and I shouldn't get distracted," she admitted out loud, circling the ruined machine, her index finger and thumb holding her chin in thought. "However, I have accumulated many points, and there were no instructions on the test forms against teaming up." Deciding to loot her latest victim before leaving, she could use the missiles of the three-pointer as spears. Sarah headed off in the direction the birds were flying, moving slower in an effort to stop her explosive spears from being disturbed too much. Swerving around tree trunks and avoiding exposed roots, Sarah noticed that the birds were moving, their flight path simultaneously changing. Up in the trees, she saw squirrels hopping from tree branch to tree branch, some heading in the same direction as her, while others came from it. Emerging into a clearing, Sarah slowed her pace, walking into an open section of the forest. All manner of birds and mammals were gathered, and at the center of this was a student. He was sat on a destroyed two-pointer, its legs splayed out underneath it and its elongated head ripped off of its body. The student had a rocky head, uneven and pointed upwards, a square jaw, and his broad, muscular build filled out his yellow gym uniform. Perched on his shoulders, head, and outstretched hand were many birds and squirrels, and the boy seemed to be whispering things to them, with the animals answering him in tweets and chirps. "Hello," Sarah called out, waving a hand as she walked over. The boy spun his head over to Sarah, and giving out a small eep, quickly hid behind the wreck of the two-pointer. His head and eyes poked over the top of the cover, trembling gently. "Don't worry," Sarah said, holding her hands in front of her and stopping in her tracks, "I didn't mean to scare you." "So you're the one the birds are flying to?" The boy hesitated before nodding his head rising from behind the two-pointer ever so slightly. Sarah heard a chirp to her side, and looking down she saw a squirrel looking up at her, perched on its hind legs. It had a dark body with a pale belly, and its tail was thin yet poofy. Bending her knees to get lower to the ground, Sarah slowly reached out her hand, presenting her closed fist to the inquisitive rodent. The squirrel moved closer, giving her hand a sniff, before surprising Sarah by climbing onto her hand, swiftly making its way up her arm. Making its way onto her shoulder, the squirrel looked at Sarah, before nuzzling into the crook of her neck. Noticing her fellow student's look of awe, Sarah reached a hand up to her neck, gently stroking the back of the squirrel. "I love animals," she explained, slowly making her way over to the shy student. "When I was a child, I would spend most of my afternoons watching the animals that lived on my family's estate. Whenever my brothers and sisters joined me, I would point out all of the animals that I could identify by feature, the ones I had seen time and time again. I had learnt their mannerisms, their unique looks, I even named them. I would spend my evenings researching what foods they ate, then ask my parents and aunts for help preparing it." Gently scooping the squirrel up in her palm, Sarah, now having walked around the ruined two-pointer, held out the squirrel to the shy student. The squirrel looked back at Sarah, giving her a small squeak, before leaping out of her hands, quickly being caught by the student. "Let's start over," Sarah said, holding out her hand to the rocky student who crouched before her. "My name is Sarah Kurusu, nice to meet you." The boy timidly stood up, reaching out his hand and gently holding Sarah's. When she shook his hand, she noticed that his grip was gentle, as if he was afraid to hurt her. The boy pulled his hand back after 2 shakes, and grabbing a stick off the ground he began to scratch characters into the ground. "Koji, Koda?" Sarah asked, testing verbally how the name sounded. "Koji Koda, is that your name?" The boy nodded. "Well, nice to meet you, Koda. How many points do you have so far?" Koda hesitated, his head lowered as he twirled his index fingers. Taking a breath, he looked Sarah in the eyes, splaying out all 10 fingers, closing his hands, opening them wide once more, then closing his hands, with only 2 fingers held out. 22. Sarah asked, tilting her head to the side. Koda nodded, then pointed a finger at her. "Me?" Sarah asked, receiving a nod from Koda. "I have 46 points." Koda's eyes widened at her answer before hanging his head. "Hey, 22 isn't a bad score," Sarah said, gently placing a hand on his shoulder in comfort. "I have a quirk that's suited for physical activities, so if your quirk allows you to talk to animals, your score is more impressive than mine." Koda hadn't expected that praise, simply responding by rubbing a foot into the dirt in embarrassment from the praise, a small smile on his face. The teachers never said we couldn't work together, Sarah started, causing Koda to look up. How about you and I join forces? Heroes routinely team up on missions. Koda opened his mouth, but before he could say anything the blare of a horn sounded out through the forest. Sarah and Koda turned to the noise, both students' eyes widening at the sight they saw. Emerging from the trees, a machine rose up. Sarah recognized the appearance of the villain bot, it was the zero-pointer. While she had expected them to be an obstacle for students to avoid, she hadn't thought that it would be the size of a small office building. The zero-pointer let out a mechanical roar, causing many birds nearby to fly up in terror. It raised a giant, robotic fist, and slammed it into the ground, creating a cloud of dirt and dust to shoot up into the air. The force of the blow was so great that some trees were uprooted, sent flying into the air, before crashing back down to earth. With her advanced hearing, Sarah was able to hear the screams and shouts from her fellow students. While many of them were fleeing in terror, what she heard caused her blood to run cold. Help us. Please, don't leave me. Arg, my leg, it's stuck. Come on, burn, DMNU. The trees that the zero-pointer had launched into the air with its slam, as well as trees it had uprooted simply by moving through the forest, had caused many students to become trapped beneath their weight. Sarah spun towards her fellow student, adrenaline causing her heart to race. Koda, can you use your animal friends to scout out the forest? There are some students who are trapped underneath fallen trees. We can't just leave them there. Koda nodded, turning to the birds who hadn't flown away. Even though he spoke quietly, Sarah could just manage to hear him with her enhanced senses. Quickly, my friends, scout out the forest and find those who are trapped underneath the trees. Hurry, we must save them. Sarah was surprised to hear such a soft, high-pitched voice from such a broad, muscular student, but she shook away her surprise as the birds around Koda flew off into the air, each of them heading towards the zero-pointer, fanning outwards in their search. We should follow after them, Sarah said, her eyes following the flight path of the birds. Can they find you again if you move to another location? Koda hesitated, before grabbing his stick once more and writing in the dirt. They won't know where I am, but if you make a loud enough noise, they will likely investigate. Alright, Sarah nodded, then we need to move quickly. There is no further point in stealth, we'll simply avoid any villain bots that we encounter. Deciding that speed was the utmost priority, Sarah surprised Koda by picking him up in one of her arms. Seating him in the crook of her arm, Sarah set off, with Koda yelling out in shock. Sorry, Koda, just hold on to my neck. I'm more worried about you falling off than me dropping you. The terrified boy did as she told him to, wrapping both arms around the back of her neck and squeezing his eyes closed, terrified of the speed they were traveling at. Having abandoned all pretense of stealth, Sarah ran as fast as she safely could through the forest, leaping over logs and roots, swerving around trees when they blocked her path. Hearing the sound of wing beats, Sarah slowed to a canter, and out of the trees flew a sparrow. It flew alongside Sarah and Koda, making chirps and tweets to the quiet boy. Nodding his head in understanding, Koda pointed in a direction through the woods. Is that where your friend found someone? Sarah asked, though she had already changed directions. Koda gave a nod, and the sparrow flew ahead of them, leading the way. They soon arrived on a site of destruction, where an uprooted tree had landed, unfortunately trapping two unlucky students. Please, help us, one of the students, a male with round glasses, cried out, his companion a female with blue hair. Don't worry, my friend and I came to help, Sarah reassured, placing Koda down on the ground. Koda, I want you to get on the other side of these two, we'll lift on 3. Got it? Koda nodded, quickly crouching down and hooking his hands underneath the tree trunk. Sarah did the same, with the two trapped students laying in between them. Ready? 1, 2, 3, lift. Sarah and Koda both pulled on the fallen tree with all of their might, their teeth and muscles straining under the weight. But centimeter by centimeter, the tree lifted off the ground, until both students' legs were clear. "You're free, go now," Sarah yelled, her voice straining. The two students scrambled free, their legs intact, if mildly bruised. With the two out of danger, Sarah and Koda let go, the tree falling to the ground with a thud. "Thank you," the girl said, helping her friend off the ground. "Come on, the exit is this way." "Go, Koda, and I still have people to find," Sarah said, picking Koda up in her arm as he spoke to another bird that had found them. Dashing away before the students could say a word, Sarah and Koda, directed by the birds of the forest, went from student to student, helping each and everyone that they found. Even though many of them were rattled and in shock by the events, none were seriously injured. The worst case that they encountered was a student with a broken arm. Even as the practical exam ended, Sarah and Koda weren't finished, rescuing the final person who had been trapped. With no more students to help, Sarah, Koda, and the final student they helped, a pink-haired small breeds arachne, a subspecies of arachne who were smaller, yet faster and more energetic than typical arachne, walked together to the exit of the testing grounds. But before they arrived at the gate, someone crossed their path. "Ah, there you are," a rough voice said. Emerging from the forest ahead of them, Sarah, Koda and the arachne student's eyes widened at the sight of Hound Dog, a pro-hero and staff member of UA. He was large, muscular, and taller than Sarah, who herself often stood head and shoulders above a crowd at 190 centimeters, 6 feet 2 inches. Hound Dog was dressed in his hero costume, consisting of a jacket with a thick fur lining, as well as a black muzzle over his elongated snout, due to him being a kobold heteromorph. "Mr. Hound Dog," Sarah greeted, a smile growing on her face from meeting the hero. "Why are you here?" Call it personal bias, but Sarah loved collecting posters and merchandise of heteromorphic heroes, such as Miruko, Gang Orca, Selkie, and Hound Dog. "We did a head count at the gate, you three were missing. When we asked around, a few of the students mentioned 2 students who had gone around, helping those trapped by the zero-pointer," Hound Dog explained. "Your records matched their description to a T." The kobold hero turned his gaze to the arachne student, who was hiding behind Sarah and Koda. "As for you, you must be the final missing student. Off you go, the written portion of the exam starts in half an hour, don't be late." The pink-haired student bowed to Sarah and Koda in thanks before heading to the exit, her arachnid legs propelling her through the woods. Seeing her leave, Hound Dog turned his gaze back to Sarah and Koda, the latter of whom started to tremble at the attention he was receiving, such was his shyness. "As for you two," Hound Dog said with a growl, "you really are something." Sarah and Koda both tensed, fearing what the pro had to say next. What they didn't expect was for Hound Dog to place his hands on each of their shoulders. "Every student was monitored by our panel of judges," he explained, "and you were graded based on your performance. For every villain bot you defeated, you gained villain points. What we didn't tell you was that there was a secret grading system in place, rescue points. These could be awarded for 2 reasons, working with your fellow examinees, or rescuing your fellow examinees. When the zero-pointer emerged, you both worked together to locate and rescue your fellow students. You ignored the stray villain bots that crossed your path, instead prioritizing the safety of your fellows. Simply put, you both acted like real heroes." Through the mask, Sarah and Koda could see the proud, genuine smile of the pro-hero. "I don't know what rank the 2 of you will receive, but rest assured that you 2 passed the practical with flying colors. Principal Nizu would be a fool to deny the 2 of you a place in the hero course, and I know he is anything but." Sarah gasped, realizing what had just happened. Koda was equally shocked, a small smile on his face, ever so surely growing each second. "Right, enough standing around," Hound Dog said, a growl entering his voice once more. "You both still need to pass the written portion of the exam. Get to the entrance, the bus is waiting for you too." "Yes sir," Sarah beamed, Koda by her simply nodding vigorously, before the both set off towards the exit. With the knowledge they had passed the practical portion of the exam, as well as the direct praise from Hound Dog, the two students seemed to have an extra spring in their step. After all, they were now that much closer to achieving their dreams of attending UA. Katsuki stood triumphant over his latest monument of greatness. A duo of 3-pointer villain bots and a 2-pointer villain bot had attacked him, probably thinking that with numbers they could take him down. Fat chance. All of that arrogance in their programming led to where they were now, scorched and broken underneath him. Taking in deep breaths, Katsuki let a feral grin cross his face. His hands were twitching from the effort he had put in, and he had worked up quite a sweat during the 3-on-1 brawl. That was the stupid machine's first mistake. By getting him worked up, causing his sweat glands to work overtime, they had simply added fuel to the fire, his explosions now larger and more powerful. That had been the nail in their coffin, and they couldn't even realize it until it was already over. 71, Katsuki grinned, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow and shaking out his hands. I doubt even All Might got that high of a score when he was my age. He swept his gaze over the area around him. According to his handout, Testing Grounds Alpha was a unique testing ground. Whereas the standard testing grounds were replicas of office building blocks, Alpha was more of an urban area, one that was reminiscent of where Katsuki lived. Not that it mattered. As the future number 1 pro hero, Katsuki had to be the best in almost all environments. Not even he would deny that there were some areas that he simply would fall behind in, such as snowy areas or underwater, but everywhere else, he had to excel. And how fitting is it, Katsuki smirked as he drank from his water bottle. Because his quirk required him to sweat a lot, he also had to drink an equal amount of fluids. The future no. One takes the entrance exam for UA, the number 1 hero academy, in Testing Grounds Alpha, named after the first letter of the Greek alphabet. Reality really is amusing sometimes. Katsuki was snapped out of his humor as a siren blared throughout the testing grounds, as the ground and the mechanical corpses that he stood atop began to shake and tremble. Some extras happened to be in the same general area, and seeing them pointing at something behind him, Katsuki turned around. What he saw was a building-sized villain bot, almost as large as Empty Lady. It was ridiculously huge, easily crushing a house underneath its grasp as it stood to full height. That must be the 0-pointer, Katsuki thought to himself, ignoring the extras who were screaming, panicking, running, and generally living up to their status as an extra. While the extras are distracted, I'll snatch up some extra points before the exam ends. Hey, firecracker. Huh. Katsuki growled, knowing that whichever extra had called that out had directed it to him. It wasn't even an original nickname. Walking over to him was a female arachne, her 6 eyes and spider lower half dead giveaways. Rather than panicking like the other extras, she had a cocky grin on her face, and carried over her shoulder was a round net of silk, inside of which appeared to be various parts of the villain bots. What do you want, you DMN extra? Katsuki growled, hoping the brave extra would take the hint. Just wanted to check something, she responded, resting a hand covered in a black exoskeleton on her hips. How many points you got? I've seen you rampaging all over the place, so how about it, firecracker? Gotten a good haul so far? 71, so what? Katsuki yelled. The arachne simply smiled, using her free hand to brush aside her lavender hair out of her face. 71, not bad. I'm sitting at a lovely 69. That made Katsuki pause. 69, to get that high of a score, she'd had to have defeated at least 23 3-pointers. Katsuki sighed, giving the arachne a proper once-over. Her clothing was tight and form-fitting, allowing for maximum movement without any drag or obstruction. He couldn't say the same for the clothing he had seen on some particularly stupid extras. She was covered in soot and oil, with her clawed hands particularly coated. Add to that the large haul of parts she had scavenged from the villain bots, and she was certainly no slouch. Guess she isn't an extra after all, Katsuki sighed to himself, his gaze focusing on the still rampaging zero-pointer. What do you want, Silks? Silks, huh? Silks said aloud, questioning the nickname Katsuki had given her. I've definitely heard worse names thrown at me. That comment caused Katsuki's hands to twitch, subconsciously wanting to form into fists. He should have figured that she'd had a past with discriminatory shitheads. The idea of it alone made him angry. Why look down on someone simply because they have a powerful quirk? It was a mindset that the weak and jealous had, one Katsuki couldn't understand or support. I have a plan, and I need your help to pull it off, Silk said, snapping Katsuki out of his brooding. He turned his attention back to her, raising a single eyebrow. Why would I help you? He asked. We're all competing for the top spot. I agree, Silk said, and against anything else, I wouldn't need your help. I got my points by hunting on my own, solitary, like a real spider. Thing is, that, she said, gesturing at the zero-pointer, I can't beat on my own. You and me, however, I reckon we can bring it down. Why the hell would I do that? Katsuki growled. Didn't you pay attention to present mic? That zero-pointer is called a zero-pointer for a DMN good reason, it isn't worth any points. Sure, officially, Silk said, tilting her head and smirking at Katsuki, which for some reason irritated him to no end. However, this is the best hero school in Japan. You really think they won't award people for taking that hunk of junk down? Katsuki wasn't convinced. It wasn't worth the time wasted trying to kill it with no guaranteed rewards, when instead he could be killing other villain bots, which would get him more points. His doubt clearly showed on his face, because Silks continued. Look, she sighed, when a big, nasty villain shows up in town, you expect the heroes to take care of it before anyone is hurt. That zero-pointer, that's a real nasty villain. So who are you going to be, Firecracker? Are you going to be All Might, Endeavor, one of the top pros who swoop in and save the day, or are you going to be like the local heroes who stand back, claiming their quirks aren't suited for the fight? Her words caused Katsuki to relive flashes of that day, 10 months ago. The sludge villain finding him, forcing its disgusting, slimy body into Katsuki. The sense of powerlessness at being controlled, the sense of humiliation at his quirk being used by the villain for evil. But most of all, the hate and rage he felt to those DMN extra pros who stood there, not doing a DMN thing. It didn't matter that his life was in danger, or that stupid Deku had rushed out in some idiotic attempt to save him. It didn't matter that people could have been hurt if the sludge BSTRD was allowed to continue its rampage. No, all they were focusing on was the fact that their quirks weren't ideal. Rather than even trying, they simply stood there, useless. That, more than anything, made Katsuki angry. They didn't even try. I ain't no shitty extra, Katsuki growled quietly, speaking more to himself than to Silks. Refocusing his attention back on the zero-pointer, who had started to come their way, Katsuki glanced to the side, looking at Silks from the corner of his right eye. What do you need me to do? Seriously? Silks asked, apparently surprised. You want to hear my plan? No offense, but you give off alone. Wolf, do it my own way, type vibe. You came up with a plan, so I'm willing to hear it, Katsuki explained, rolling his eyes. You aren't some extra, I'll give you that, so whatever you say isn't guaranteed to be completely useless. Okay then, Silk said, and Katsuki could hear her smirk in her voice. How long can you stall it for? How long do you need? Silks paused, turning her head to look at Katsuki. Confused at her response, he looked back, only for her to give a toothy grin, revealing a row of sharp teeth. Keep it busy for as long as you can, she answered, leaping up onto a nearby replica house. Lead it down the main road, I'll get a warm welcome prepared for it. TCH, Katsuki scoffed, that's a dumb plan. You have a better idea? Silks challenged, shooting a line of silk from spinnerets on her wrists between houses on the main road. I said it was dumb, not stupid, Katsuki clarified, before igniting the sweat on his palms, rocketing him into the air. Using controlled explosions, Katsuki flew up to the head of the zero-pointer, the large machine having noticed his presence. Using one of its large hands, it tried to swat Katsuki out of the air, but with how slow it was moving, it was too easy to avoid. Die! Katsuki yelled, thrusting a palm of exploding nitroglycerin outwards at the villain bot's head. The explosion smashed into the green metal of the machine, causing its head to recoil slightly. Landing on the head with a crouch, Katsuki looked around at the damage he had caused. Or rather, lack thereof. Sure, the top of the machine has scorch marks all over, but it was all minor damage. His explosions hadn't yet pierced through the thick armor, but it was only a matter of time. With a continuous string of yelling and swearing, Katsuki fired explosion after explosion into the zero-pointer, the metal underneath his feet starting to glow red. Out of the corner of his eye, Katsuki saw movement. Turning his head, his eyes widened as one of the zero-pointer's large hands was moving downwards, trying to swat him off of its head. SHT. Katsuki swore, aiming his hands in front of him. Firing off simultaneous blasts from his hands, the force of the explosion threw him back, just in the nick of time as the zero-pointer's hand slammed down strong in front of him. The force of the impact caused the machine to sway, and the movement gave Katsuki an idea. "Let's see you try and swat me without hands, you dumbass machine," Katsuki grinned. Racing over to where the fingers of the zero-pointer lay, he placed his hands at one of the joints, his grin turning feral. Die! Another powerful explosion rocked the machine, but this time taking effect. While the head of the zero-pointer was covered in thick armor, the same couldn't be said for the exposed, vulnerable joints that allowed its fingers to move. The zero-pointer gave off a synthetic roar, and Katsuki reckoned it was one of pain, if it was capable of such feeling. Its second hand raised up, trying in another desperate attempt to remove the source of the damage from its head, but Katsuki simply dodged it, using another burst of explosions to leap out of the way. Firing off more blasts at the joints in its hands, Katsuki started to notice the effect it was having. The machine was having difficulty moving its hands, where before it was slow yet dexterous, now it was struggling, more often than not slamming its hand down on its head, causing more damage to itself than to Katsuki. The zero-pointer turned on its treads, trying desperately to grab him. Even though Katsuki's grin had never left his face, the sensation of toying with such a large villain being incredible, he was starting to feel the strain his explosions were having on his wrists. SHT, he thought to himself, opting to throw himself out of the way rather than use his quirk. How long does Silks need? She'd better be close to finishing, or this will all have been for nothing. Hey, firecracker! Katsuki heard from nearby. Chancing a look, Katsuki saw Silk standing on top of a roof behind the zero-pointer, waving at him. She had clearly made the most of the time Katsuki had bought her, as the entire main road of testing grounds Alpha had been crisscrossed with lines of silk, so thick that it seemed as if a large white blanket had been draped over the road and houses. Ignite this at the front of the machine's head. Silks yelled up to him. Holding the round net of silk by a string, she started to twirl it, demonstrating her innate strength to not only lift the large ball of metal, but also to spin it at a rapid pace. She let it go at just the right moment, causing it to sail through the air, right at Katsuki. He just managed to grab it, air being forced out of his chst from the impact. Grabbing it and running, Katsuki booked it over the head of the zero-pointer, making a mad dash for the front of the head. Even though the machine tried to squish him, its hands were damaged, many of the joints sparking or warped from the power and heat of Katsuki's explosions. Reaching the edge, Katsuki leaped off, spinning in the air to face the zero-pointer's face. Its red eyes seemed to track his movement, its hands moving to grab him. Too late. Katsuki grinned, tossing forward the orb of parts. For the last time, die. His explosions burst forward, the exertion and adrenaline forcing his palm sweat glands to work overtime, creating the largest explosion he had created during the entire entrance exam. The recoil sent him flying back, and he created a few smaller explosions for good measure. He had seen what was inside Silk's gift, and he knew he needed to make some distance. After all, she had handed him a large collection of three-pointer missiles. Kaboom! The missiles ignited, engulfing the zero-pointer's head in flames, and the recoil throwing it back as if it had been decked in the face by All Might. Thrown off balance, the zero-pointer started to tip backwards, right towards the threads that Silks had prepared. But as Katsuki flew alongside the falling zero-pointer, he saw something that caused his blood to run cold. Two extras, for reasons that eluded him, had wandered into the main street, completely oblivious to the falling zero-pointer. "Oi, extras!" Katsuki called out, rocketing forward. "Get the hell out of the way, now!" The two extras looked behind them, revealing two girls, one with short, red hair and the other with long, black hair, who froze as they took in the sight of the zero-pointer's back falling towards them. They let out a scream, rushing off down a side street, out of the way. If there was one thing that Katsuki found useful about extras, it was the fact that they were often too scared to get in his way. However, because Katsuki's attention was focused on the oblivious extras, he failed to notice the zero-pointer's desperate last attempt at revenge. He saw it in the corner of his eye, and by the time he realized what it was, there was only a window to fire off a blast at the sweeping hand, trying to slow it down. The robotic hand connected, swatting Katsuki out of the air, the force slamming into his left shoulder. He swore, blinking tears out of his eyes from the pain that spiked through his left arm. Using his good arm as an emergency brake, he fired explosion after explosion out of his right arm, doing his best to stabilize his movement and slow his fall. But despite the painful explosions he fired, he knew he was in for a rough landing. "This is going to hurt like a beach," he thought, closing his eyes and bracing himself. Instead of feeling the jolting pain of him colliding with the asphalt, likely breaking multiple bones in his body, he felt someone catch him, holding him tight to their body. "God-damn, firecracker," Silk said, landing softly on a nearby rooftop, "you really made me worry for a second." Katsuki opened his eyes, seeing that the Arachne girl had caught him in a bridal carry. Gently placing him back on the ground, Silks gave him a look of worry when tried to take a step, grasping his shoulder and hissing through his teeth. "CRP, that zero-pointer got you good," she said in a worried tone. Walking over, she started to spin Silk from her wrists, wrapping up his broken arm in a compression sleeve, trapping it and preventing its movement. "Yeah, but I would have been fine if those DMN extras hadn't gotten in the way," Katsuki grimaced, trying to ignore the pain from his shoulder. "Okay, that should do for now," Silk said, stepping back from her craft. "It should hold for a few days, but we should get you to a doctor. I'm sure UA has medical staff on site." Katsuki merely grunted. As he looked up at Silks, and he hated the fact she was more than 20 centimeters taller than him, he saw her grinning at something behind him. "Would you look at that," she said, sounding proud, "our plan worked." Looking over his shoulder, Katsuki saw the zero-pointer still falling. Many of the lines of thread that Silks had placed had already snapped, but they had served the purpose of slowing the villain bot's fall. Lines of silk further down were loose, having plenty of slack between the buildings. Their purpose was shown as the zero-pointer fell onto these, the lines bending and stretching, eventually stopping the machine's fall, coming to a rest suspended over the main road. Katsuki got a good look at the damage they had caused to it. Most of its face was destroyed, and in some areas the armor plating had been stripped away entirely, exposing the wiring and machinery within. Only two of its eyes remained, the bottom two, with the rest either cracked or destroyed outright. The lights in its eyes dimmed, slowly turning black, as the seemingly unbeatable machine shut down to the sound of Present Mic's voice. "It's all over." Katsuki sagged, the adrenaline of the fight wearing off. Before he could fall to the ground, Silks caught him, one hand on his back and the other on his good shoulder. She gently lowered him to the ground, before sitting down herself, her arachnid legs splayed out underneath her. It was only as Katsuki got a good look at her face that he realized how pale she was. While she was pale when he first met her, he figured it was just her usual skin tone, but now her skin seemed to be bordering on blue. Sweat covered her face, and she was taking deep breaths. "Hey, what happened?" Katsuki asked, confused why she had such a reaction. "Sorry, spinning all of those threads took a lot out of me," she answered, using the hem of her shirt to wipe her face, causing Katsuki to quickly look away as she exposed her toned midriff. "I honestly didn't know if I had made enough to catch it. For a moment I thought I had simply done enough to slow down its fall, reducing the property damage, that sort of thing." Silks looked back at the face of the zero-pointer, giving a low whistle of approval. "You're no firecracker, that's for sure." She turned her face back to Katsuki, giving him a smirk. "We make one hell of a team, Dynamite." Katsuki simply grunted, laying his back on the tiled roof. All of the exhaustion seemed to be catching up with him. He and Silks had murdered that zero-pointer, so he reckoned he could afford a few minutes of rest. "If we don't get any points for killing that thing," he thought to himself as darkness encroached on his vision, "I'm going to be so pissed." When Sarah and Kaorini's siblings arrived home from school, they all wanted to hear how the exam went, even the older ones. Having a captive audience at the dinner table, the two sisters recounted their experiences in their respective testing grounds. The younger children oohed and awed as they listened, enthralled in the story. But life carried on, and semi-private academy still had a few weeks left of school. Sarah, Kaorini's and Tenya all became pseudo-celebrities overnight, all of their classmates wanting to hear how they did. Even the upperclassmen, those who were enrolled in Sumai's high school course, were keen to hear how their juniors were doing. Of course, Papi, Doib, Fiori, and Fios were all nervous about their older sister's results. Each day, both before and after school, they checked the mail, hoping to find a set of letters addressed from UA. Each day that the letters hadn't arrived caused them to become more and more nervous. However, it all came to an end a week after the entrance exam. "It's here!" Doib yelled, running through the house, followed closely by Fiori and Fios, with Papi flying close behind. "Sarah, Kaorini's, it's really here." The four children burst into the living room, finding Sarah sitting on the ground on top of a mattress, her legs tucked underneath her as she read, while Kaorini's lazed about in a hammock that she and her mother often used, designed for their Arachne bodies, with the younger Arachne scrolling on her phone. "Come on, open it," the four children chorused, each of them bouncing, or in the case of Fiori and Fios, wriggling, with excitement. "Hold on, you four, let Sarah and Kaorini's decide how they want to do this," their father said, walking into the living room and taking the letter from Doib's hands. Turning to his elder daughters, he gave them a questioning look as he held out the letter. "Do you want to do it with all of us, or take it up to your room and tell us after?" The two sisters looked at each other, communicating without having to say a word. "We'll watch it in our room," Kaorini said, sliding off of her hammock and taking the letter from her father. "I'm pretty sure we know the answer already, but we'll do it privately." Sarah and Kaorini's siblings complained and groaned as they left the room, soon fading into the background as the two sisters went upstairs to their shared room. Closing and locking the door, for you never knew what lengths younger siblings would go to, the two sisters looked at the letter. "Well, this is the real thing," Kaorini's muttered. Addressed to Sarah and Kaorini's Kurusu, from UA High School. "It is addressed to us together, so we will open it together," Sarah said, taking hold of one end of the letter. "Ready?" Kaorini smiled, taking a firm grip on her own end of the letter with her gloves. 1, 2, 3, they said, pulling at the letter. The paper ripped, and dropping out of the letter was a small disc. It spun like a coin, before falling on one side and emitting a projection. Light illuminated the room, and the warm, booming laugh of All Might filled the air, as the blonde, muscular hero announced his presence. "I am here as a projection," the number one hero proclaimed, leaning into the camera. "All Might?" Kaorini's gasped, "I thought this letter was from UA." Shoo. Sarah hushed. He'll probably explain it. I'm going to assume that both of the Kurusu sisters are present, but if one of them isn't, this projection can be paused by pressing the top. All Might paused for a second, his signature grin remaining in place. Right, now I'll assume you both are here, and I'll begin. To start with, I want to congratulate the two of you. You both passed with flying colors, in both the practical as well as written exams. Even though the practical is weighed more heavily for those in the hero course, you both did well. Good job. Now, on to your individual reviews, All Might said, holding out a remote and pressing a button, causing a screen behind him to light up. On it were details of Kaorini's application, as well as still images of her during her practical exam. Kaorini's Kurusu, you were assigned to Testing Grounds Alpha, one of our specialized testing grounds based off of a suburban environment. Throughout the 10 minutes you had, you managed to gain a total of 69 villain points. Well done. Kaorini's grinned at the display as the numbers flashed up on the screen, thinking that was all. Her expression however grew confused as All Might continued. While that certainly would have been enough on its own for you to pass, that's not all. There was also a secret category that our panel of judges gave you points for, rescue points. Awarded for heroic acts and deeds, these were a secret ranking that were designed to reward those who prioritized doing the right thing over basic combat. And look at this. All Might pressed another button on his remote, showing images of Kaorini's creating the massive mass of webs that slowed down the zero-pointer. You took down a zero-pointer? Sarah said, her expression stunned as she looked at her younger sister in shock. With a little help, Kaorini's admitted, rubbing the back of her head. Not only did you prevent the zero-pointer from causing any more collateral damage after you and your teammate defeated it, but the judges also awarded points on what you said earlier. The screen changed again, this time a video taken from a camera that had recorded Kaorini's conversation with a male student, who had spiky, ash-blonde hair. Look, when a big, nasty villain shows up in town, you expect the heroes to take care of it before anyone is hurt. That zero-pointer, that's a real nasty villain. So who are you going to be, Firecracker? Are you going to be All Might, Endeavor, one of the top pros who swoop in and save the day, or are you going to be like the local heroes who stand back, claiming their quirks aren't suited for the fight? The video paused, and the camera focused back onto All Might. Thanks to my morning routine of moisturization, I keep my young looks, All Might joked, but his voice slowly became more serious. However, the fact remains that I am growing old. I'm no longer as powerful as I once was, and one day I will have to retire. Unfortunately, too many pros have become reliant on the chart toppers to save the day. Many are calling it bystander syndrome, and it threatens to bring down hero society as a whole. But to hear such conviction coming from you, such bravery in the face of overwhelming odds, fills me with confidence, young Kurusu. As such, All Might said, pointing to the screen where Kaorini's 69 villain points showed, our judges gave you an additional 35 rescue points, bringing your grand total to a whopping 104 points, and placing you in third place in the practical exam. Sarah and Kaorini's both screamed for joy, quickly embracing each other in celebration. Now, All Might continued, causing the sisters to quieten down, onto young Sarah Kurusu, the eldest child of the Kurusu family. Sarah Kurusu, you were placed in Testing Grounds Omega, another of our specialized testing grounds, this time a forest environment. During your allocated 10 minutes, you gained a total of 46 villain points. Not bad, Kaorini's chuckled, both glad Sarah did as well as she had, but privately happy that she had done better than her older sister. However, as I mentioned, rescue points were also taken into consideration. So take a look at this. The screen changed to short clips of Sarah and a rocky-headed boy racing through the woods of Testing Grounds Omega. It showed them finding various students who were trapped underneath fallen trees, rescuing each and every one of them. Even after the practical exam ended, you and young Koda continued your rescues, going above and beyond the call of duty. And it's not just me saying that. Once more, the screen changed, now showing clips of students that Sarah and Koda had rescued, each of them either informing the teachers present about 2 students who had saved them, as well as those who wanted to pass on their thanks. How could our school not reward such selfless actions? That's why, young Kurusu, not only did you receive 46 villain points dash. The screen brought up Sarah's combat points. But both you and young Koda received 60 rescue points, the maximum we can award. Sarah had her mouth wide open in shock, while Kaorini's was counting in her head what her sister's score was, her eyes widening. Wait a minute, Kaorini said, turning to her sister and grabbing her by the shoulders, a smile rapidly growing on her face. That means dash. That means, young Kurusu, that you have achieved an incredible total of 106 points, placing you in second place. Kaorini's cheered, pulling her sister into a hug. Sarah was unresponsive for a moment, stunned by her score, before snapping out of it and pulling Kaorini's into a tight hug, gently crying into her younger sister's shoulder. As a side note, All Might added, leaning into the camera with a hand by his mouth, as if whispering a fact only meant for them, your score, young Sarah Kurusu, was only 4 points shy of tying with my record back in the day, 110. Well done indeed. Oh my god, Kaorini's whispered, you almost beat All Might's entrance exam score. All Might's. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice as tears continued to stream down her face. Now, one final thing, All Might concluded. You must both be wondering, why is All Might presenting our results? Well, young ladies, that's because you are looking at UA's latest teacher of their heroics program. All Might leaned towards the camera, extending out his hands, almost as if he were reaching through the hologram himself. Welcome, young Sarah and Kaorini's Kurusu, to your new hero academy. I look forward to seeing the both of you in class. Plus Ultra. The hologram ended, removing the light from the room. Sarah and Kaorini's simply sat there, both still holding onto each other for support. They remained there for several minutes, only being taken out of their trance when they heard a knock at the door. Sarah, Kaorini's, they heard Centauria ask from outside their room. Do you want to come out now? Both sisters got up, Sarah in particular wiping her tears from her eyes and face, and blowing into a tissue that Kaorini's offered up. Grabbing the door handle together, the 2 sisters stepped out of their room, greeted to the sight of their entire family, their father, each of their respective mothers, their 5 aunts, and 10 siblings. Well, what's the answer? Ragnara asked, her arms draped over their father's shoulders. The 2 sisters looked at each other, smiles appearing on their faces, before turning back to their family. We're in. Suffice to say, the Kurusu household had quite a celebration that night. Katsuki sat at his desk, the light from a lamp being the only source of illumination in his room. The letter from UA had arrived in the mail after dinner, and Katsuki took it up to his room, the old hag surprisingly silent about the whole thing. She hadn't insisted that Katsuki play it in the lounge, instead she had simply given him a nod, showing she had no issues with him watching it alone. She can be surprisingly considerate, Katsuki thought to himself, his gaze never leaving the unopened letter. Well, whenever she isn't yelling her head off. What caused Katsuki's hesitation over opening the letter wasn't whether or not he had passed, he was certain he had. No, the issue causing him to hesitate was whether or not he had come first. Had he wasted his time with the 0-pointer, or had Silks been right? He opened the letter, and out dropped a small, metallic disc. The top of it lit up, creating a projection of a large, smiling figure that Katsuki immediately recognized. All Might? He wondered aloud. Ha ha ha, All Might said, giving his signature laugh, I am here as a projection. Young Bakugo, the number 1 began, congratulations on your entrance exam. It shouldn't go as any surprise, but you have passed, and secured one of the 36 slots available for the UA Hero course. Katsuki held his breath. He knew he had passed, now all he needed to know if he had made the right choice. To start with, you performed incredibly well on the written portion for the entrance exam, All Might explained. You certainly haven't skipped out on your academic training to focus on your quirk training, that's for sure. Now, in terms of your points, All Might said, pointing a remote at a screen behind him. The screen displayed images of Katsuki's battles throughout the entrance exam. You were assigned to Testing Grounds Alpha, and scored a very impressive 71 villain points. Katsuki's eyes widened, and he took a deep breath. Unfortunately, the 0-pointer wasn't a deception, it really was worth 0 villain points, All Might explained, his voice serious and empathetic, even as his perpetual smile remained. Katsuki gripped his pants, his teeth biting down on his lower lip to stop it from trembling. So this was it. All of that effort for nothing. The shitty 0-pointer wasn't worth a DMN thing. However, All Might said, snapping Katsuki out of his thoughts, while the 0-pointer was worth 0 villain points, that wasn't to say it was worth nothing. He pressed the button again, showing Katsuki fighting against the 0-pointer, the image perfectly capturing the sheer difference in size between the organic and synthetic fighters. A hero's job is to fight against the odds, no matter the circumstances. Even if the villain is much bigger than us, we fight them to protect the people, even if it puts us in harm's way. All Might changed the screen again, stepping to the side. This time it showed the 2 extras who had gotten in the 0-pointer's way. Additionally, he began, these 2 came to the staff after the written exams. Let's have a listen to what they had to say. Excuse me, one of the extras said, the one with the red hair. We were in Testing Grounds Alpha, and there was a boy there who was working with another student to take down the 0-pointer. He was injured because of us, if he hadn't had to warn us to move, that villain bot wouldn't have hit him. Is there any way we can help him? Her black-haired friend spoke up. Even if we have to give him our points, he saved our lives. We just wandered into a dangerous area, not thinking about where we were going. The video paused, and All Might sidestepped back into the center frame. There we have it, 2 students who saw you as a hero, and you haven't even had your first day of class yet, he laughed. Fortunately, UA's entrance exam had a hidden grading system, rescue points. Given to students who acted in a heroic, selfless manner. And you, young Bakugo, All Might said, turning once more the screen, earned 40 rescue points, bringing your grand total to 111 points. Katsuki was stunned, so much so he could barely breathe. This was the moment, he knew it, what came out of All Might's mouth next was what he had been waiting for. Your score, an astonishing number, has placed you firmly in first place. Well done, young Bakugo, for being first amongst your peers. Katsuki didn't roar in victory, nor did he smirk in self-assured success. He grasped his chst, trying to hold his heart, which seemed to be beating 1,000 beats a second. He had done it, he was first. He and Silk's plan had worked. Now, there are 2 points left I want to mention, All Might stated, pointing a thumb at himself. You've probably wondered by now why I, All Might, #1 pro hero in Japan, are telling you your results for UA. Well, that's because you're looking at UA's newest heroics teacher. Katsuki's jaw dropped. All Might. The All Might. Was going to be his teacher at UA. And one last thing, All Might added, his grin seeming to grow to a painful width with how wide it was. It is my great pleasure to announce that you, Katsuki Bakugo, have set a new record for UA's practical portion of the entrance exam. Katsuki didn't move, he didn't blink, he didn't even dare to breathe. Does that mean dash? You, Katsuki Bakugo, with a score of 111 total points, have bested my own score of 110. A score that held the record for 40 years, only now being beaten. Well done, young Bakugo. Katsuki felt tears well up in his eyes, but this time he didn't try to stop them. These ones he'd allow. All Might leaned towards the camera, holding out his hand to Katsuki. Welcome, young Bakugo, to your new hero academy. I look forward to teaching such a promising young pupil. The hologram video ended, the small metal disc shutting off. Katsuki didn't move from his seat, simply sitting there, crying tears of joy and relief. He stayed there for a while, only after he had calmed down did he venture downstairs. After all, his mother wouldn't let him hear the end of it if she found out he had been bawling out his eyes because he passed. But maybe he'll tell her about beating All Might's record. That should give her a shock. As Shota Aizawa sat at his desk going over the roster of students he would be teaching as their homeroom teacher for this year, he couldn't help but sigh, resting his head in his hands. He had only arrived back home in the late hours of the night, having completed a fairly uneventful patrol. The life of an underground hero was a mixed bag. On one hand, no pesky reporters, journalists or paparazzi hounding you every time you needed to go outside and grab some groceries. On the other hand, late-night patrols were very taxing, on both the body and mind. Not only did he have to stay up and active late into the night, often coming back home only hours before dawn, but nighttime seemed to draw out the worst kinds of people. Drug dealers, human traffickers, and sick-minded individuals all seemed to emerge out of the woodworks when the sun went down, moving about the deserted streets like rats. Dealing with a skewed sleep CYCL, an active job as a teacher, and coming home bruised and battered, often made him exhausted throughout the rest of the day. It was one of the reasons why he had continually turned down Emi's advances. She deserved someone more than him. He didn't want to get her hopes up, only for them to shatter when he was found dead in some alleyway. No, he preferred the way they were now, her constantly trying to make him laugh and fall for her, and him doing his all to resist both of her attempts, the former more successfully than the latter. After he had arrived back at his small, sparse apartment, he quietly made his way through to avoid waking up his cat, Nemui. Deciding he might as well look at what kind of students he was going to deal with this year, he grabbed a can of coffee from the fridge, tied up his long, black hair into a messy bun, sat down at his desk and booted up his computer. Last year's students had all been a mess. They all assumed they could slack off, take it easy. He was quick to crush that ideology, expelling each one of them on the first day. He re-enrolled them later in the week of course, not even he was willing to risk annoying Principal Nizu, but the shock did the job. Sure, each and every one of them were terrified of him, but that was the price he'd pay to make them get their act together. An unfortunate part of being a teacher of hero trainees was the fact that their profession was anything but safe, and he'd be damned if he had to go to another student's funeral. He'd gone to too many as it was, and he wanted to spare his students that pain, even if it was only for a year longer. This all led to his current situation. Going through the roster of students, he'd managed to identify 6 who were likely to be problem children in his class. He knew why the rat gave him the first-year problem children over Can. His erasure quirk allowed him to handle them easily, but knowing the reason and liking it were two separate things. The first of the problem children was one izukumidoriya, hailing from Shizuoka. His file showed a nervous-looking teen, with freckles on his cheeks that formed diamonds, messy green hair, and bright green eyes filled with hope. During the practical for the entrance exam, he had completely destroyed the zero-pointer that was assigned to the testing grounds, halting its rampage. Myheroacademia wasn't happy when that happened. Shota smirked, remembering his colleagues' reaction while they watched the students participate in the practical from the viewing room. However, upon reviewing the footage and reading the notes that Recovery Girl had made, Shota realized that in the process of stopping the zero-pointer, Midoriya had destroyed his right arm and both of his legs. An unstable quirk. Shota wondered, theories racing through his mind. With how illogical modern society is, with a strength quirk like that it's likely that he's never had any opportunity to test it out, what with the damage it can apparently cause. But why was he born with a quirk so ill-suited to his body? Maybe it stockpiles strength, and he can release it in a burst of energy. Did adrenaline cause him to surpass his mental limiter? Given that the young boy had scored full marks on rescue points, 1 of 3 this year, he seemed to have a hero's heart, but heart alone wouldn't be enough. I'll have to keep an eye on that one, Shota noted. Even if it would be cruel of him to crush a child's dream of being a hero, if the boy couldn't gain control over his power without causing harm to himself, then Shota's conscience couldn't allow the boy to stay enrolled at UA. The next problem child was one Katsuki Bakugo, also from Shizuoka. His file image showed a teen with a cocky smile, ash blonde hair, and red eyes filled with arrogance. According to his file, Bakugo and Midoriya attended the same middle school, Aldera Junior High. During Bakugo's entrance exam, he had also taken down the 0-pointer assigned to his testing grounds, although he required the help of a fellow student, and the 0-pointer wasn't nearly as destroyed as the one in testing grounds beta. Instead, what caught Shota's attention was the points Bakugo had gained, as well as his quirk. "That's right, this one's the record breaker," Shota mused to himself, remembering the fuss the other staff members were making over All Might's old record from his youth being broken. He knew that All Might would have congratulated Bakugo in his hologram letter, so it was likely that the student was going to have a high opinion of himself. Joy. The second thing that caught his attention was his quirk. Quirks often express themselves in their host's personality. Someone with a fire quirk would likely be hot-tempered, while someone with an ice quirk would likely be cold and distant. For the kid to have a quirk that allowed him to create explosions from his hands likely meant he had an equally explosive personality. "God, why can't I have a normal class, just for once?" Shota pleaded, having an exaggeration and half in a genuine, desperate plea. The fact that Midoriya and Bakugo were likely to be the lesser of the problem children wasn't lost on Shota. Next on the list of children who were going to cause him to lose sleep from stress were the sisters of his class, Sarah and Kaorini's Kurusu, both hailing from Saitama, with their files showing a profile picture of the two. Sarah had blonde hair tied up behind her, a ponytail from what Shota saw on the footage, blue eyes and equine ears on the side of her head. He knew from seeing her in action that she was a centaur heteromorph, but even if he hadn't, he would have been able to guess. Even though she preferred to separate her hero and private identities, something Shota could agree with, Centauria Kurusu, the knight hero, cavalry, was known within the hero business as an honorable fighter, hailing from the prestigious Shionis line. Having emerged onto the hero scene before Shota had attended UA as a first-year student, and being an alma mater of UA herself, Shota figured that he was going to have his hands full with teaching her daughter. The other Kurusu child, Kaorini's, was different to her older sister. Having paler skin, lavender hair that hung loose, 6 eyes that were a solid red in color, as well as a row of sharp teeth, she definitely gave off a wilder look as an arachne compared to her sister's kind and calm appearance as a centaur, not helped by the fact she had helped Bakugo to take down the 0-pointer. But Shota knew appearances could be misleading, so he'd have to know the two better before deciding anything. Even though Kaorini's and Sarah didn't share many facial features, or even share the same species, they did share the fact of having famous mothers. Ragnara Kurusu was world-famous as a clothing designer, operating 2 independent companies. The first, Wonder Webs, specialized in clothing that was not only light and flexible, but also strong and durable, perfect for hero costumes that didn't require any special gadgets or upgrades. The second company, Woman's Webs, specialized in women's lingerie, especially the more risque variety. Due to him having Nemuri as a friend, he had been on the receiving end of her constant praises for the arachne, much to the private embarrassment of himself and Yamada, who were socially obligated to listen to their friend talk. The fact that both students were heteromorphs meant that his quirk would be useless against them. Sure, he could stop Bakugo from igniting his explosive sweat, or stop young Ishido from producing acid from her body, but those were non-biological creations, a result of their quirk. The Kurusu sisters, along with one Mashireo Ojiro and one Tsuyu Azui, were the 3 within his class that had true heteromorphic quirks, even if Ojiro was the only one to not be a heteromorph. The difference between these 3 compared to their future classmates who had similar quirks, such as one Mizo Shoji and Minoru Mineta, with the quirks Dupliarms and Pop-Off respectively, was that their quirks couldn't be shut down, due to them being an inherently biological function. Shoji, with the ability to create body parts from his large arms, and then extensions from his extensions, could have his ability to create more body parts such as eyes, ears or hands halted when under Shota's quirk's effect. The ones already made would remain, that was the nature of a mutant quirk, but he would be stuck with what he had already made. A heteromorphic quirk on the other hand, and heteromorphs by extension, were purely biological, with organs and body parts constantly present. For example, Shota wouldn't be able to use his quirk to stop young Kaorini's Kurusu from producing webs from her spinnerets, because her ability to create webs didn't come from a quirk's ability, but from a biological organ in her body. The same with Ojiro and his tail, his quirk amounted to making his hair float and his eyes gleam in the presence of their quirks. Now, if one of them had a secondary, non-biological quirk, then he would be able to erase that quirk as usual, but that was a separate matter. The fifth problem child was one Shoto Todoroki, yet another from Shizuoka, and the youngest son of Enji Todoroki, the flame hero, Endeavor, current number 2 pro hero in Japan, as well as the grandson of Haka Todoroki, the former pro hero Salamander. His relatives clearly had faith in him, seeing how Todoroki was one of the 4 students admitted into the hero course from the recommendation exam. His file showed an image of a teen with long red hair, swept over the right side of his face, covering it completely. His left eye was an icy blue, contrasting against the stark red of his hair. What the color of his right eye was, Shota didn't know. But despite the flawless quality of his skin, with no freckles, blemishes, spots or scars in sight, Shota noticed the look young Todoroki had in his gaze. It was firm, tempered, the gaze of someone who had seen too much at too young of an age. That gaze, as well as the high position of power and authority his relatives held, made Shota make a mental note to keep an eye on the student through the school year. If it was worse than he thought, Inui might have a student show up for teacher-mandated counseling. The final problem child, and the one Shota was worried the most about, was Momo Yaoyorozu, who came from Aichi, and the second recommendation student in his class. Her file showed her as a mature-looking teenager, with good looks, long, black hair tied up into a spiky ponytail, with a long strand framing the right side of her face. Immediately, her family name singled her out in Shota's mind as a member of the 1% of the 1%. The Yaoyorozu family, wealthy beyond belief, were the owners and founders of the Yaoyorozu conglomerate. Having influence in almost every corner of the business world, from fashion, to support gear, even to weapon manufacturing and distribution, the Yaoyorosis were world famous, with young Yaoyorozu being the next in line. However, the fact that she was applying at UA made Shota wonder if the Yaoyorosis were trying to expand into the hero business as well. Given how powerful her quirk, creation, was, Shota didn't doubt the potential she had. Oh well, Shota shrugged, turning off his computer after his work was done. She got in on recommendation, and the principal isn't one to be swayed by wealth or power. Given his relationship with the HPSC, it would be more accurate to say that the more power you have, the less liked you are by him. Shota flopped onto his bed, too tired to care that he was sleeping in his hero costume. It didn't matter, he did it all the time in class whenever he tried to catch up on sleep he had missed the night before. This year is going to be eventful, that's for sure, Shota thought to himself as he drifted off to sleep. What did I do to deserve this? Izuku, have you got your pocket tissues? Inko Midoriya, mother to Izuku Midoriya, asked her son, who was in the process of rushing through the house, getting everything ready for his first day at UA. Yeah, he absent-mindedly replied from the bathroom, giving himself one final look over. And your handkerchief? Have you got that? She added, poking her head into the apartment's bathroom, only to pull back as Izuku rushed past her. Yes, he replied with an exasperated voice. I've got it. No time, gotta hurry. Izuku, his mother called out one final time. What? He asked, looking over his shoulder as he pulled up the back of his red shoes. His annoyed expression fell as he saw the warm smile his mother looked at him with, tears in her eyes. You look great, was all she said. Izuku hesitated at the door, returning his mother's smile with one of his own. See you later. Rushing to the station, Izuku caught a short train ride to the UA campus, surrounded by high walls with the large, 4-pillar building towering above the barriers. Running through the glass-walled corridors, Izuku counted the rooms, trying to find the class he had been assigned to. Class 1A, he muttered, before pulling to a stop before a large, towering door with 1A emblazoned on the front. What a giant door, Izuku gasped, looking up in shock at the sheer size of his classroom's door, more than 3 times his height, 5 meters 16 feet 4 inches, tall if he had to guess. I guess it has to be accessible to everyone. Only 1 in 300 passed the entrance exam, Izuku thought to himself, reaching for the door handle. 36 students in the hero course, across 2 classrooms means 18 per class. Add in the top scorers in the recommendation exams, 4 of them in total, split across the classes means a total class size of 20. It'll be just the elites from the exams, Izuku muttered, slowly opening the door. I hope Kaken and that scary guy are in the other class. But as soon as Izuku opened the door, he was blasted by the sound of the noisy classroom within. Well, 2 of its noisy occupants. Remove your foot from that desk. Such an action is insulting to those who came to UA before us as well as the craftsmen who made the desk. Like I care. What middle school are you from, you extra? They're both here, Izuku deadpanned, already accepting his fate. In the middle of the classroom sat Kaken, leaning in his seat and resting 1 foot on the desk. Standing above him was the scary blue-haired student from the entrance exam, the one who scolded him during present mix presentation as well as confronting him before the practical portion of the exam even began. Both were dressed in the UA uniform, wearing a long-sleeve, button-up white shirt, a gray blazer with blue-green stripes on the collar and hem of the sleeves, and dark blue-green pants. The scary student was wearing a red tie, same as Izuku, though his tie was done up better than his own. Kaken on the other hand didn't wear one, even having the top button of his shirt undone. I am from semi-private academy, the brunette said, likely taken aback by Kaken's habit of referring to those he viewed as far beneath him as extras. My name is Tenya Ida. Semi. Kaken scoffed with a feral grin. A stuck-up elitist, then. I should blow you to bits. Hey now, Dynamite, don't go assuming all of us private school kids are the same as glasses. Izuku whirled around, having to look up at the towering figure who stood behind him. It was the purple-haired Arachne girl from the entrance exam, Kaorini's if he remembered the name her friend referred to her as. Though he wasn't sure if that was her given name or family name, it didn't sound Japanese. He stepped aside as the Arachne strode into the room, making a beeline for Kaken and Ida. He tried to give her a warning about Kaken's volatile personality, but he was stopped by the words Kaken said. Huh, you in this class too, Silks. Silks. Izuku thought in disbelief. Not extra, not you, but a nickname. Is Kaken making friends? What, you doubted I'd get in? The Arachne questioned teasingly as she stood beside him, bending over to reduce the height difference. Really, Dynamite, I'm hurt by your lack of confidence. TCH, Kaken scoffed, looking away. Like hell I doubted you'd get in, not with the amount of points you got. I was just worried there wouldn't be anyone worth my time here. He looked back at her, a smirk on his face. At least now I know there is someone to occupy the second-place position. Ah, Izuku nodded to himself, not a friend, simply a rival. While Kaken and the Arachne student continued to talk, Ida looked over at Izuku. Wait, Izuku realized, turning his head, he's not looking at me, he's looking behind me. Standing behind him was the kind centaur girl from the entrance exam, the friend of the Arachne named Kaorini's. Like her friend, she towered over Izuku, who barely came up to her chin. Are you all right? She asked, looking down at Izuku with a kind look. Class will be starting soon, so we should all take our seats. Oh, yes, sorry, Izuku apologized, quickly stepping into the classroom and out of the doorway, allowing the centaur to walk calmly into the classroom. Izuku noticed Ida walking over to them, tensing as the tall male student looked at him. I'm from semi-private academy, my name is Dash. Tenya Ida, I heard you before, Izuku interrupted, his hands held up before him as he shook from both nerves and fear. I'm Izukumidoriya, pleased to meet you. Ida then turned to the centaur girl, giving her a nod. Sarah, I'm glad to see we were assigned to the same class. Me too, Tenya, it's always fun to have friends with you every day, she smiled. Tenya? Izuku wondered. That's his first name, right? They're on a first-name basis already. They can't have met only today for them to both know each other, maybe the entrance exam. No, wait, she and her friend were wearing the same uniform as Ida. I never thought about it until now, but it might be that they are from the same middle school. That Arachne girl did mention that not all students who attend private schools are elitists, so they both likely went to Sumi as well, or maybe a rival private academy. Wait, Ida did mention that his friend had sensitive hearing, and horses do have more sensitive hearing than regular humans, so it isn't a stretch to assume that she has enhanced hearing as part of her quirk. Are you alright? The centaur student asked, a sweat drop trailing down the side of her face in confusion. You're mumbling up a storm there. Oops, Izuku yelped, clamping his hands over his mouth. His internal dialogue hadn't been quite so internal after all. Sorry about that, he apologized, his voice muffled as it came through both of his hands. I have a habit of mumbling. Yes, I remember, she chuckled. You were the one who was mumbling throughout present mixed speech, right? Izuku flinched at that reminder. Oh, yes, sorry, that was me. Oh, please don't think I am condemning you for it, she quickly said, it's just that I never realized the student my sister saved was the same boy who could mumble up a storm. Your notes on present mic were truly, extensive. Oh, they weren't that impressive, collecting hero notes is simply a hobby, Izuku blushed, rubbing the back of his head with a hand, before abruptly stopping as her words sank in. Wait, sister. He turned his gaze back to where Kaken and the Arachne student were, still engrossed in their conversation. So, what was your final score? The Arachne asked, checking her nails, and Izuku realized that both of her hands were covered in a black, chitinous material. I'm sitting on a nice, juicy total of 104. Ha, Kaken barked out a laugh, 111. Seems you really are taking second place. Wish that was the case, Dynamite, but second place in the entrance exam goes to my big sis, 106, she explained, jabbing a sharp-looking thumb over her shoulder to where Izuku, Ida and his friend were standing. Kaken looked over, inadvertently taking notice of Izuku standing by the doorway. He scowled, as Izuku expected he would, causing Izuku to turn away, paying attention to the conversation next to him. I'm sorry, Sarah, I didn't realize that there would have been a hidden nature to the exams. Truly I am a failure to the Ida family, Ida lamented, his head low as he bowed to his awkward-looking friend. Well, I'm glad you're reflecting on what you did wrong in the exam, Tenya, but I'm not sure if that should have been your takeaway from it. And you, Midoriya, Ida continued, rounding on Izuku, you too perceived the true nature of the practical exam, while I did not. I misjudged you, he exclaimed, his hands held flat in front of him vertically, as if stuck in a frozen hand chop. I hate to admit it, but you were the superior candidate, even if you were ranked lower than I. Izuku stammered, not sure what to say in response. He looked behind Ida to the kind centaur girl, but she only smiled at her friend, rolling her eyes in what Izuku could only guess was kind-hearted exasperation. Ah, that curly hair, a voice cried out from behind Izuku. Looking behind him, he saw it was the brown-haired girl from the entrance exam, the same one who tried to catch him before the tests, as well as the one who he saved from the zero-pointer, and she in turn saved him from the fall. You got in just like Present Mike said, she cheered, her voice filled with excitement, swngng her right arm up and down. Makes sense though. That punch was awesome. No, I mean, I have you to thank for speaking on my behalf, Izuku stammered, one hand rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment while the other covered his now incredibly red face. She's so nice, and she looks cute in that uniform, he screamed in his mind, this time making sure that it remained in his mind. "Ah, I see you passed the entrance exam as well," Ida remarked, nodding his head in greetings to the gravity girl. "My name is Tenya Ida, it is a pleasure to meet you and see you in good health." "Oh, you were the speedster at the exams," the brunette said. "You were really fast, no wonder you made it in." She turned her attention to the centaur girl, skipping over Izuku who was still trying to regain control over his blushing face. "And you are?" Sarah Kurusu curtsied, lifting the sides of her uniform's skirt. "Tenya mentioned you in his recounting of his exams, he says you have a very powerful quirk." "Oh, it's not that much, only really good as a rescue hero," the brown-haired girl blushed, waving away Kurusu's compliments before turning her attention back to the group as a whole. "So we've got our entrance ceremony and guidance sessions today, yeah," she rambled. "Wonder what our teacher'll be like. Boy, I'm nervous." Izuku, having finally calmed down his emotions, teenage hormones and face, was about to give his thought when a voice from the corridor spoke. "If you're here to socialize, then get out." Izuku, Ida, Kurusu and the nice girl looked behind them. Laying on the floor was a large, yellow sleeping bag, inside of which lay a disheveled-looking man, his face covered in stubble, his hair long and messy, and his eyes bloodshot. "This is the hero course," the man said, pulling out a juice pack and draining it dry near instantaneously, slowly making his way up. The entire classroom's attention was focused on this strange man, who after removing himself from the sleeping bag, revealed to be a lean adult, who wore a black outfit, a belt with pouches, and some sort of long, white scarf wrapped around his neck. "It took 8 seconds for you to quiet down," the man spoke in a monotone, somewhat bored voice. "Time is a precious resource. You lot aren't very rational, are you? Is he a pro-hero too?" Izuku wondered. "He doesn't look familiar, and he seems so haggard and tired." "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Pleased to meet you," the teacher introduced, shocking much of the class that this man wasn't only a pro-hero, wasn't only a teacher at UA, but also their teacher, and their homeroom teacher at that. The teacher reached into his sleeping bag, pulling out multiple PE uniforms, consisting of dark blue pants with white vertical lines going up the legs and a dark blue short-sleeve shirt with white lines that formed the letters U and A. "Quickly now, change into your gym clothes and head out to the grounds," he explained, holding up a set of gym clothes to show the class. Many of the students stepped forward cautiously, grabbing a set of the unisex clothing. "Before anyone leaves," Mr. Aizawa said, causing everyone in the class to freeze where they were. Mashireo Ojiro, Sarah Kurusu, Mizo Shoji, Kaorini's Kurusu. You each have gym clothes that are designed for the unique body type your quirks give you. Come to me and I'll give you your set. Izuku, having already grabbed a set of PE clothes, headed to the changing rooms, along with Ida and the brown-haired girl, who he still hadn't gotten the name of. Sarah Kurusu headed to the teacher, along with the arachne, Kaorini's Kurusu, a student with a muscular tail, and a tall student who had a mask over his face and multiple arms on each side, each arm having webbing in between them. "So, their names are Sarah Kurusu and Kaorini's Kurusu," Izuku muttered to himself as he jogged down the hallway. "Do they have similar-sounding family names with different kanji, or are they related? Cousins, perhaps? As far as I know, heteromorphs aren't able to interbreed, so it's unlikely they're sisters." Wait, Sarah said that Kaorini's was her sister, and Kaorini's said the same thing. Step-siblings perhaps, with different parents. But no matter how strong Izuku questioned the matter, even continuing to try and solve the riddle he had made for himself as he got changed, no answer came to him. Shrugging his shoulders as he followed his fellow male classmates out of the changing rooms, Izuku filed away the question for later, now wondering just why their teacher had called them to the field. "A test of our quirks?" Izuku and many of his fellow classmates exclaimed, confused by the reasoning their teacher had taken them to the sports field. "What about the entrance ceremony? Or guidance sessions?" the brown-haired girl asked, confusion written across her face. No time to waste on stuff like that if you want to become heroes, Mr. Aizawa explained. UA is known for its freestyle education system. That applies to us teachers as well. None of the students understood what their teacher was trying to say, giving him blank looks. Softball throwing. The standing long jump. The 50-meter dash. Endurance running. Grip strength. Side-to-side stepping. Upper body training. Seated toe touch, Mr. Aizawa sighed, holding up his fingers as he listed them off. You did all of these in middle school, yes? Your standard no quirks allowed gym tests. The class nodded as one. They were standard activities that every middle school practiced at some point in the year. This country still insists on prohibiting quirks when calculating the averages of those records, Mr. Aizawa said. It's not rational. It limits students whose quirks could give them an advantage and gain a better score. It prevents some students from competing entirely, simply because they have a mutation quirk. Izuku saw Sarah and Kaorini's Kurusu, as well as a green-haired girl, nod their heads, clearly having been at the receiving end of that. The Department of Education is just procrastinating, Mr. Aizawa huffed in an annoyed tone. They insist on following laws that were put in place over 100 years ago, when the world was very different. Back then, heteromorphs and those with quirks were the minority. Now, the opposite is true. Bakugo, Mr. Aizawa called out, turning his attention to Kaken. How far could you throw in middle school? 67 meters, Kaken replied. Great, now try it with your quirk, Mr. Aizawa said, tossing a white softball to the explosive teen. Do whatever you need to, just don't leave the circle. Give it all you've got. Kaken confidently strode over to the outlined circle, a grin on his face. Awesome, he smirked, winding his arm back. I'll add a bit of boom to this pitch. Die, he yelled, SWNGNG his arm skyward. Kaboom. A massive explosion burst forth from his palms, sending the softball rocketing into the air, circular shockwaves bursting forth as the softball broke the sound barrier multiple times. Die. Izuku wondered, his hair blown back from the force of the explosion. After a few seconds, the ball fell back to earth, bouncing a few times before rolling to a stop. It's important for us to know your limits, Mr. Aizawa explained, holding up his phone as the numbers started to climb. That's the first rational step to figuring out what kind of heroes you'll be. The class all took in the score of Kaken's throw, their eyes bulging at the final results, 705.2 meters. Whoa! This is awesome, someone cried out. 705 meters. Seriously, a student near Izuku exclaimed, the mutant-type student with the tail. So we can use our quirks for real, a spiky redhead student cheered, giving a wide grin to a pink-skinned student standing next to him, who looked equally excited. Man, the hero course is great. Unlike his classmates, Izuku had the opposite reaction. Hold on, this is bad, he worried in his mind, glancing around at the excited reaction of his classmates. I didn't know this was coming. While the majority of Izuku's classmates were excited by their teacher's words, their reaction clearly wasn't to his liking. Awesome, you say? He said in a quiet, monotone voice, yet despite his lack of yelling, seemed to cut through the chatter. You're hoping to become heroes after 3 years here, and you think it will be all fun and games? Right, Mr. Aizawa said, giving the class one hell of a death stare through his shaggy hair. The one with the lowest score across all 8 events will be judged hopeless, and be expelled. What? The class shouted, shocked by the ultimatum given to them on the first day. This is bad, Izuku worried. All or nothing. I can't regulate my power yet. Your fate is in our hands, Mr. Aizawa leered, pushing his hair up and out of his face with one hand, giving a cruel, mocking grin to the students. Welcome. This is the hero course at UA High. The lowest score will be expelled, the brown-haired girl exclaimed in shock. It's only the first day. I mean, even if it weren't, that's totally unfair. Natural disasters, highway slips, rampaging villains, calamity is always around the corner, Mr. Aizawa explained, turning his gaze to the nice girl, who flinched under his gaze. I'd say Japan is full of unfair things, and the world by extension. Heroes are the ones who correct all that unfairness. If you were hoping to spend your evenings hanging out at McDonald's, Mr. Aizawa continued, I'm sorry to tell you that for the next 3 years, UA will run you through the ringer. That's plus ultra. Use your strength to overcome it all. So bring it. The demonstration is over, now it's for real. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 3. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Jevm.mita on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video, till then goodbye.